You see this video?
You are fake news.
If you're in Canada, there's a good chance that you can't actually access it. That's because Meta banned news on its platform in Canada in retaliation to a law that demands that the tech giant pay its fair share to journalists.
The tech companies believe they can simply shut down access, and users will be so upset that the local politicians won't be able to stick to their guns on the regulation.
The regulation in question, it's a last-ditch effort by governments to save local and national news outlets around the world from Google and Meta's greed.
Some estimates think that Google and Meta owe newsrooms between $10 to $13 billion a year for our content.
Over the course of the past 2 decades, what we've seen is immense consolidation and just untold numbers of acquisitions to preserve and maintain their power while crushing rivals.
And as Meta and Google siphon away billions in ad revenue, newspapers across the US are collapsing.
Our newspaper was all local. That's all gone now, and it's kind of sad.
Right now, success or failure is 100% in the hands of those that control distribution. And news organizations do not control their own distribution. The tech companies do.
In this video, we're going to take a look at how exactly these tech giants were able to gain unfettered control over our news and how ongoing court battles might just save the future of journalism and our democracy.
The amount of responses we received when we told the community we were closing was phenomenal. Oh, please say it's not so. I mean, it was a source of information for this area. And now it's gone.
This is Steve Blackwell. He was the publisher of the Greer-Citizen, a South Carolina family-owned newspaper that was in business for 106 years until now.
We had to close the operation July the 31st. Decline in revenue was the main cause. In our peak, we had car dealers running full-page ads every week. Your grocery stores were running display ads. Your department stores, your retail stores, Lowe's, those were running half-page ads every week. This past year, most were 1, maybe 2 inserts a year. And that would have been maybe at Thanksgiving, for Black Friday, and at Christmas. It just makes it impossible to maintain an operation.
The Greer-Citizen was integral to this town.
Probably one of the most important things for local newspapers is to be the watchdog of local governments. And when there are no reporters here, they're going to go and just do what they want to do.
And although their loss is tragic, it's one of the countless stories of newsrooms shuttering all across the country. In 2023, an average of 2.5 newspapers closed every week. Over 500 journalists were laid off in January of this year alone. Today, more than half of the country has just one local news outlet or no news outlet at all.
The market for local journalism in practically every medium has been in a version or a state of collapse. And that's because the information environment that we are working in is dominated by monopolies that have essentially gained control over journalism itself.
Just look at ad revenue, the primary way newspapers stay in business. In 2005, newspaper revenue from advertising in the United States was around $50 billion. But by 2022, that number had plummeted down to $9.8 billion. All of this revenue didn't just evaporate out of thin air. Newspapers didn't suddenly forget how to sustain their business model. The revenue they relied on was gobbled up by tech giants.
Since 2017, Google's ad revenue increased from, say $20 billion to $260 billion today. But print ad revenue is declining by $3 billion over that same period of time. That is an enormous amount of money for newsrooms, and it is pennies to the amount of money that Google and Facebook are receiving annually through their explosive growth in digital ad revenue.
So how did Google and Meta control all of this revenue? The truth is, it's less about technological innovation and more about corporate consolidation.
So starting in 2003, Google starts making all sorts of interesting acquisitions. The biggest and most notable of those acquisitions around the mid-2000s, 2006, 2007, was its acquisition of an ad exchange called DoubleClick. And what an ad exchange is the technology that connects publishers, like newspapers and websites, with advertisers, the small businesses, the advertisers and firms who want to place ads on those websites. So DoubleClick is really the fundamental exchange for how the digital advertising economy works.
When Google acquired DoubleClick, it essentially bought the supply chain of digital advertising, creating a monopoly.
one of Google's biggest advantages, if not its largest advantage writ large, was access to search query data, the searches that individual users input, and connecting those and analyzing those and processing that data to return better search results.
So you've probably heard the term surveillance capitalism. They pioneered this idea of turning constant data surveillance of users, how they're interacting on their platform, their demographic information, their interactions off the platform, and turn that data into useful information that they can package and sell to advertisers.
This means that Google can now track every individual online and show them ads based on data that no one else had. Because of DoubleClick's market position and its own search data, Google now had a god's eye view into what every publishing company, every advertiser, and every user did. As a result, most of the ad spending flowed their way.
At every point, they're siphoning off revenue that used to be this direct relationship between advertisers and publishers.
You know, Meta took a really similar approach to its obtaining monopoly power, and it also did this through a series of acquisitions. When Instagram popped up and became a serious competitor to Meta in the social media space, what did it do? It acquired Instagram. And so now Instagram and Facebook are owned by the same company, Meta. When WhatsApp came along and started becoming a major threat to Meta's social media dominance, it acquired WhatsApp. So Meta, like Google, like Apple, like Microsoft, all of these big tech companies have really obtained a lot of their market power through what are called serial acquisitions.
But Meta didn't just build a monopoly over social media. They also colluded with Google in the digital ad business.
Meta actually created a tool around 2017 to allow publishers to bid outside of Google's ad exchange. And Google intervened and said, hey, don't do that. That's going to take traffic away from our ad exchange. How about we give you preferential treatment through our ad exchange? We'll give you user data that nobody else is getting. We'll give you bid speeds and bids that nobody else is getting. And Meta, agreed. Meta essentially stopped their innovative way to allow publishers and journalists to circumvent Google's ad exchange, and now have this really cozy relationship with Google that is, exacerbating a lot of the harms that we talk about.
After decades of acquisitions and collusion that handed both Google and Meta a monopoly over the news ecosystem, governments across the world have put policies in place to rein in their power and resuscitate newsrooms.
Australia really led the way with a novel scheme that allowed for newsrooms to come together and jointly bargain for some of that ad revenue that had been siphoned away by Google and Facebook and other, large media platforms. That's been a tremendous tool for returning revenue to newsrooms, and it's been profoundly successful in Australia. You see an explosion of new newsrooms in Australia. You see journalists being hired at much higher rates. So we're hoping to see that happen in America too.
I wish the story ended there, but the thing about monopoly power is when companies have too much of it, they can use it to sabotage any attempts to rein them in.
In Australia and Canada, we saw Facebook censor news, but they went overboard, and according to a Wall Street Journal investigation in Australia, was a specific tactic, a negotiating tactic to go overboard. They ended up censoring government websites, informational website for NGOs, etc., not just news.
Now, this fight to rein in tech giants and restore revenue to newsrooms has reached the US. In April, Google cut off access to some California news sites as a show of force against a state bill that would require tech giants to pay publishers for distributing news content.
AB 886, also known as the California Journalism Preservation Act, would require Google and Meta to pay news publishers for scraping our journalism and then pay that money back to local newsrooms. And those publishers in turn have to spend at least 70% of those funds on payroll. So on a very macro scale, we're talking about big tech bringing money back to the news industry in the form of a wage subsidy.
Well, that's what the bill was supposed to do. As the legislative session came to a close, a backroom deal was made between Google and California officials after the tech giant lobbied hard to water it down. Overnight, the California Journalism Preservation Act transformed into a deal that gives journalists much less, while also promising millions of dollars to AI initiatives that could harm journalists even further.
The collapse of the CJPA is really a story about Google's political power. Google and Facebook have been able to hold lawmakers hostage to prevent the adoption of really common sense regulation that can start to remedy this problem.
Ultimately, I don't know if Meta and Google are going to change their ways unless government makes them, unless they're viewed as monopolies, unless they're viewed as sort of having monopolistic practices.
In August of 2024, a federal judge ruled that Google is a monopoly.
This is one of the most titanic antitrust cases in the history of the United States, certainly the biggest one in the tech industry since the Department of Justice prosecuted Microsoft for being a monopoly more than 20 years ago. It maintains a monopoly on search. It controls 90% of the consumer market for search engines.
And this isn't the DOJ's only case against Google. In January 2023, the Justice Department, along with 8 states, filed a separate civil antitrust suit against Google for monopolizing multiple digital ad tech products. The jury trial could force Google to sell its ad manager suite and more broadly set a precedent for how big tech can operate in the ad revenue space. The Biden administration has also targeted Meta's monopoly over social media and advertising.
And it is directly targeting those acquisitions that Meta made around 2010 when it acquired Instagram and when it acquired WhatsApp. And the Federal Trade Commission is now stepping in and saying, hey, those acquisitions, probably not okay, probably illegal under our monopolization laws. And now they have a pending federal lawsuit that is joined by a bunch of states to break up Meta's monopoly over the social media landscape.
If the courts agree with the DOJ and FTC's determination that Google and Meta are illegal monopolies, then the next step is to decide how to break them up and invite competition into the market.
Doing so will give journalists more opportunity to negotiate directly with advertisers and to build those relationships again that really Google has usurped. No one's above the law, and that's kind of the beauty of our antitrust laws, is that they are enforced against the largest companies who are exerting their dominance across our economy, and we have a batch of regulators right now who are committed to doing that.
Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more stories like this one, make sure you like and subscribe. And if you have any story ideas of your own, be sure to drop them in the comments below.